Rich old woman brought a slave to obey silently, but she did something no one expected. The house on Hortensia Street, number 89, was a kind of island within the city that grew around it. Tall, with moss-green wooden windows and time-stained walls, it seemed to observe the world from above, as if refusing to step down from its pedestal. There lived Donna Herminia de Albuquerque, a lady whose inherited fortune was as old as the yellowed portraits that adorned the main corridor of the mansion. She had the habit of walking in the mornings, dragging her satin slippers over the polished floor, a glass of liqueur between her long, wrinkled fingers, her eyes always searching for something only she could see. It was on a stifling March afternoon that the house's gate opened for a woman with firm steps and a veiled gaze. Her name was Zenaide. No one knew where she came from, except Donna Herminia, who had brought her from a distant village recommended by a family acquaintance who claimed she caused no trouble, knew how to stay quiet, and did as she was told. That was all Herminia wanted. A woman who spoke little or preferably not at all, who cleaned, served and obeyed without questioning, without invading the sacred silence of the house with words. Zenaide arrived without luggage. She carried only a plain cloth bag, which she left on the kitchen bench before silently accepting the starched white uniform folded on the table. She was a black woman, with deep ebony skin and eyes like an endless night. She carried on her shoulders a calm that was not submission, but patience. The old woman observed her with suspicion. That calm was too solid to be servile. The house, which until then seemed asleep in its own silence, began to react to Zenaide's presence. At first it was almost imperceptible. The pendulum clock in the living room started working again, even without being wound. The glass pitchers seemed to hold fresher water, the corners of the corridors less dusty. Donna Herminia noticed, but said nothing. It's just a phase, she thought, as if refusing to believe that something good could come from someone she considered inferior. Clara, Herminia's granddaughter, lived there too. She was 7 years old, with an opaque, absent gaze ever since losing her parents in a car accident 2 years prior. Since then, she hadn't spoken a word. The doctors said it was trauma. Herminia preferred to call it weakness. The girl spent her days drawing on the floor with chalk, or sitting near the piano without playing it. No one approached her, not even the former maids, who always quit after a few months. But Zenaide didn't ask for anything. She simply observed. It was at the end of one afternoon that everything began to change. Clara was sitting under the fig tree in the garden, as she always did, when Zenaide approached without a sound. She sat beside the girl, and without saying a word began to braid small strands of dry straw she had brought in her pocket. Her hands moved with ritualistic slowness, and the child watched, curious but still silent. When she finished, Zenaide placed the braided figure in the girl's hands. It was a small straw doll with eyes sewn in black thread. Clara held it carefully, as if receiving a secret. The next day, the girl drew the doll on the floor. The day after, she drew Zenaide. And then she drew the two of them together. The silence that once weighed like lead began to take on color. Donna Herminia noticed that her granddaughter, previously absent, now smiled quietly when she saw the woman pass by. She found it inconvenient. "Careful with too much attachment," she muttered one day, seeing Clara offer a piece of cake to the woman. Zenaide merely lowered her eyes and thanked her with a nod. Time in the house began to take on a different rhythm. Zenaide tended to the flowers as if praying. The once withered orchids now bloomed. The washed clothes smelled of coconut soap and bay leaves. Clara, little by little, began to utter stray words. Water, sun, Zay. The nickname slipped from her mouth as if it had always been there. Herminia overheard from behind the door, and for a moment felt a bittersweet taste in her mouth. "She'll get too attached," she repeated to herself, as if trying to hold back an inevitable tide. But there was something about Zenaide that no one understood. Every Friday, just before dusk, she climbed to the attic and spent exactly 20 minutes there. Never more, never less. Herminia, who had always been terrified of stairs, one day sent someone to watch. They found nothing. The woman simply stood there, gazing at the wall covered in old blue floral wallpaper. When she came down, her eyes seemed deeper, as if she had cried inwardly. One morning, while cleaning the office bookshelf, Zenaide found a dust-covered wooden box. She didn't open it. She merely wiped it with a damp cloth and placed it on the living room table, as if returning a body to its grave. Donna Herminia, upon seeing it, paled. It was the box where her husband, dead for 30 years, kept letters, newspaper clippings, and a notebook of notes. No one had known its whereabouts since the funeral. The old woman sat before the box as if facing a ghost. She didn't thank Zenaid, but she didn't order it put away either. That night, Clara had nightmares. She cried in her sleep, murmuring disjointed phrases about fire, screams, and locked doors. Zenaid entered the room without a sound. She knelt beside the bed and, with a low, deep song, soothed the girl until her crying turned to sighs. The old woman, on the other side of the door, listened. She heard everything. The next morning dawned heavy, as if the air in the house were also trapped within an old secret. Clara woke earlier than usual, clutching the straw doll to her chest. She descended the stairs slowly, her bare feet echoing on the wooden steps. In the kitchen, Zenaid was already up, slicing thin apple wedges and arranging them carefully on a blue ceramic tray. The girl stood there, just watching, until she murmured an almost inaudible "Good morning." It was the first time she had used that phrase since her parents' death. Herminia heard from upstairs. She felt a knot form in her throat, but swallowed it like bitter medicine. "She's spoiling that child too much," she said later, seeing her granddaughter in the woman's lap. But her words no longer carried their former rigidity. They sounded hollow, like an old song no longer sung with conviction. Zenaid, as always, said nothing. She simply continued her work, her apron clean, her gaze attentive, her presence steady as a rock. In the days that followed, Clara began to follow Zenaid during her tasks. She sat on the laundry room floor, inventing stories for the clothes dancing in the soapy water. On hot afternoons, she helped gather herbs in the small backyard garden. "This is rosemary, this is rue, this is basil," the woman taught, and the girl repeated as if they were the names of stars. Herminia watched it all with growing discomfort. She couldn't name that feeling, but it grew in her chest like a thorn. She felt the house no longer fully belonged to her. Something was slipping from her control, and that was what she feared most. On a rainy afternoon, the old woman decided to climb to the attic, the same one where Zenaid spent her weekly 20 minutes. She climbed with difficulty, leaning on the handrail, her heart beating faster than usual. Upon opening the door, she found the space clean, smelling of old wood and lavender. In the corner, a wicker chair faced the wall, exactly where the blue floral wallpaper hung. But what made her step back twice was the painting above it. An old portrait of a black woman with a red headscarf and deeply sad eyes. Herminia recognized that face. It was Francisca, her mother's nursemaid. The woman who had raised her when her mother traveled the world. A forgotten figure, buried deep in memory like a photograph faded by time. She descended in silence. She said nothing. But that night, she dreamed of Francisca. She dreamed of her rough hands holding her childish face. She woke sweating, confused, with a memory so vivid it felt lived the day before. For the first time in years, she felt small. She missed a lap she didn't know she still remembered. The following week, Zenaid was cleaning the library cabinets when she found a leather folder hidden behind a row of books. Inside were old documents, letters, photographs. One caught her attention. It showed a black woman holding a white child in her arms. On the back, in faded ink, Francisca and Herminia, 1939. The woman took the photo to the old lady without a word. She simply handed it over. Herminia, upon looking, felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. She sat down slowly and remained there, still, for long minutes. "She sang to me at night," she murmured, looking at no one. "I dreamed she was my mother, but then they said she left." Zenaid didn't respond, but her eyes said, "She didn't leave. She was sent away." That night, Herminia took from the box of letters an envelope she had never dared to open. It was addressed to her in trembling handwriting, dated the year Francisca left. Upon opening it, she read words that could no longer be heard, but still wounded. "My dear Herminia, if one day you grow up and remember me, know that I didn't leave you. I was taken, as so many before me were taken. Care for your heart so it doesn't harden like your mother's. With love, Francisca," the old woman cried. She cried as if losing something for the second time, and Clara, not fully understanding, simply sat beside her and took her hand. Zenaid, standing, watched. There was a grave tenderness in her eyes. She knew that certain wounds cross generations, and that silence can be both prison and remedy. The next morning, Herminia asked Zenaid to join her in the garden. They sat under the fig tree where Clara played. The old woman took a small, rusty key from her pocket. She handed it to the woman without explanation, but the gesture was clear. It was the key to the locked office cabinet, a cabinet that held not only papers and possessions, but also stories, erased names, forgotten inheritances. Zenaid took the key with steady hands. There was no vengeance in her gaze. There was respect, and perhaps the beginning of forgiveness. Days later, upon opening the cabinet, Zenaid found a black-covered notebook filled with pages of names, dates, birth records. They were the notes of Herminia's great-grandfather, a landowner who recorded the birth of every child born in the house's basements, daughters of women he never recognized as human. There was Francisca's name, born in 1912, daughter of Inacia, house servant, father unknown, and below, other names, so many others like her. Zenaid didn't cry, but Clara, sitting beside her, pointed to the paper and said, "All these women, are they like you?" Zenaid smiled, sad and serene. "They're part of me. Part of you too." Herminia, upon hearing this, said nothing, but that day she ordered the portraits of the men removed from the corridor walls. In their place, she hung Francisca's painting, and beside it, an empty frame. She said it was for Clara to fill when she wished. Time began to move differently in that house. The rigidity of the days gave way to an unimaginable softness. Herminia, who until then counted the silverware, began to allow Clara to bake cookies with Zenaid, leaving flour on the floor. The living room clock, the one with the pendulum that had inexplicably started working again, now chimed the hours with a less mournful sound, and the windows, always closed to the noise of the world, were opened at noon to let the smell of the street in with the sun. One September afternoon, Clara brought home a school assignment about your family's history. She was sitting with Zenaid on the porch, pencil and paper in her lap, when she asked, "Zay, can I write about you too?" Zenaid took a moment to respond. She ran her fingers over the leaves of a fern and said, "You can, but write with your heart, not like you're writing a secret. Write like you're planting a seed." Clara smiled and wrote, "My family has invisible roots that run through Zenaid's feet. She is my home when everything is silent. She is the part missing from the story no one wanted to tell." Herminia read those words later in silence, sitting on the edge of her bed. She felt older than ever, but also, for the first time, alive, as if she finally understood that carrying an important name is not the same as having a worthy legacy. The following week, Zenaid asked for a day off. Herminia, surprised, didn't question it. She simply nodded. The woman left early in the morning and returned before sunset, carrying a small baobab sapling wrapped in damp cloth. She planted it in the backyard, beside the fig tree, and stood there for a few minutes. Clara, at her side, asked, "Will it grow big?" "It will if you have patience. Baobabs aren't in a hurry." "Will it bloom?" "No, but it will tell stories anyway." That night, Zenaid sat on the edge of Clara's bed and told a story not found in any book. She spoke of a dark ship, a village surrounded by drums, a woman who gave birth alone in the basement of a white house, and another who sang to soothe the cries of others' children. Clara listened with wide eyes, as if finally understanding why the world is so unequal and so full of strength at the same time. Meanwhile, Herminia rummaged through her past like someone cleaning an old house. She remembered when her mother taught her not to look into the eyes of the servants. She remembered the beating she got for calling Francisca mother in front of guests. She remembered the swallowed words, the silenced hands, the forgotten names. The next morning she called Zenaid to the office. The box of letters was on the table, and she held a new envelope in her hands. She handed it to the woman with teary eyes. "It's what I can leave. It's not an inheritance. It's a debt." Zenaid opened it. It was the deed to a small plot of land on the city's outskirts. A piece of land that had belonged to Herminia's family for generations, never used, now in Zenaid's name. The woman held the paper without apparent emotion, but Herminia saw it, a slight tremor in her hands, as if carrying more than the weight of the paper. "Thank you," Zenaid said, "not for the land, but for allowing yourself to see." Days later, Zenaid began teaching Clara to cook dishes not found in her grandmother's notebooks: moqueca, angu, vatapá. The girl learned with enthusiasm, and Herminia from a distance watched. One afternoon she tasted a dish made by the two. Silence at the table. Then she simply said, "It tastes like the earth, like origin," and she ate to the end. It was then that, During a visit from a distant relative, a comment cut through lunch like a dagger. "That woman there? The house's pet slave, is she?" Herminia raised her eyes, cold as stone. "She's not a slave. She's memory. And you've forgotten everything." The silence that followed was more eloquent than any argument. After that, no one dared call Zenaide the help again. She was the guardian of something the family, out of arrogance or fear, had buried for generations. The baobab grew slowly, as all eternal things do. Clara watered it every day with a small gourd. One day she placed a stone at its base with the word Francisca written in chalk. Over time the rain erased the name, but the tree remained steadfast, telling stories to the wind. One morning, Clara found a hardcover notebook on the kitchen table with her name written on it. Inside were recipes, drawings, short poems, and teachings about herbs, moons, and silences. It was from Zenaide, a gift before her departure. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her eyes welling up. "I'm not leaving. I'm just going somewhere else. But I'm in everything you remember." Herminia, upon learning of the departure, didn't ask her to stay. She simply embraced her, a dry, shy, but genuine gesture. For the first time she touched Zenaide with reverence. "You rewrote this house," she said. "I just hope I don't forget it again." Zenaide left at dawn, carrying only the plain cloth bag she had arrived with. The baobab remained as a living witness. Clara grew up. She became a historian. And on the day of the opening of her exhibition on the invisible women of history, she placed the straw doll she had received from the woman who gave her back her voice at the center of the room. The caption read, "She came to obey silently, but she taught us to listen to what no one else wanted to hear."